been like? You've been out on the doorstep, you've been speaking to people. What kind of reactions are you getting, and what are people telling you about, what are their main issues that they're talking to you about, and how are you planning? There's a lot of questions there. And how are you planning to help them?
Well, it's really interesting because when I'm actually on the doorstep, most of the issues that I'm hearing are very local. And it's generally about what their roads look like, whether there's an issue around something being closed locally. And that primarily reflects that most people are concerned by local things. And it's only very recently, since the booklet went out from the Combined Authority, that a lot of people have actually realised that there's a mayoral campaign going on. And then they're interested in. I've had very good feedback from people saying, "I like what you say," because they've seen what's in the booklet, and some people have been in touch on email as well, and I've been able to say what my policies are. But most of the questions, actually, honestly, are, "What's your chances of winning?" And so I'm very honest, and I say, well, the bookmakers have got me at 100 to 1, which is really good odds in the Grand National, and not bad for a Combined Authority first mayoral election, because nobody knows which way it's going to go. And because there's a new voting system in there as well, it means that people might vote a little bit differently as well. Because sometimes, it has to be said, in a general election or a local election, under first past the post, a lot of people think, oh, well, it's generally Labour around here, or oh, it's generally Tory around here. And they'll vote for the candidate that they dislike the least, as opposed to voting for the candidate.
So are you saying you're the
really
one
want
dislike the least?
Yeah. Whereas with this one, you've got two votes. So you can vote for your first preference, what you really want. And then with the second preference, you've got a little bit of an insurance vote and go, well, they can have my second preference because I don't mind them too much. Yeah. So it sort of turns it on its head.
Clever strategy there, Stewart. That's...
Well, I didn't invent the voting system, I have to confess.
No, of course not. So yes, I suppose in that sense, maybe. Because we were looking at the polls, and obviously the Lib Dems have reduced their popularity a little bit as a party, haven't they, over the years? So obviously, how will you, one of my questions was, how are you going to make sure that you're, the front runner or the most liked person in this contest, in this election campaign?
Well, it's an issue that's very pertinent, it has to be said. And one of the things about this mayoral campaign is that, for once, the smaller parties have relatively good access to the media, such as yourselves, because a lot of the time, journalists want to talk to people who are actually in positions of power. And if you don't have MPs, or if you don't have council leaders, then you don't generally get onto television or onto radio or into print. And one of the things that's been good about this is we've had equal time on things like hustings, and people have actually been able to listen to what our policies are. And sometimes that means that people can appreciate that there are some distinct differences between the parties. So, for instance, on the Combined Authority hustings, virtually everybody says, oh yes, coming out of COVID, we need to make sure that there's more money spent on skills so that people can get into new green jobs. But it's a matter of how you want to do it, and it's a matter of emphasis in terms of which areas of industry or even agriculture that you think these new jobs should be in, and how you intend to do it. And also, of course, in some areas, there's a little bit of a consensus going where people like myself can be a little bit distinctive. So I'll give you an example, and that's on the issue of HS2. Now, in the press, all that you would think that all the parties are equally in favour of it. But actually, once I raised the issue and pointed out that actually we need local connectivity, and it needs to be delivered fast. And if we actually back an HS2 project which has tripled in cost and takes another 20 years to actually get built, it means that we're never going to get the improvements that we need quick to get people moving within West Yorkshire. So I've been very vocal about being against HS2 and actually wanting to have more Transpennine connectivity and local rail improvements quicker. And because I've raised the issue, all of a sudden you've seen that some of the other parties have thought, we're going to stop just singing from the party hymn sheet, and we're going to stick up for the people of West Yorkshire as well. So there's ways of doing it. Even if you don't win sometimes, you can influence the debate, and you can influence outcomes later on down the road. So I'm hopefully making a difference in this campaign.
It sounds to me like you're looking more at personality rather than politics sometimes. Would you say that that's important in this?
Well, sorry,
personality rather than policy.
I've just given you a policy.
Yes.
Well, sometimes you've got to be able to articulate well on behalf of the people that you represent. And I have to say, I feel confident that I'm able to do that because I've spent 20 years being a local councillor. And I've been involved in power and in opposition on Leeds City Council. I've been on the West Yorkshire Combined Authority for the past 5 years. So I've seen how decisions are taken at a West Yorkshire level. So most importantly, I can see where the mistakes are made. And if I get elected, I can get in quick and sort them out. And I think that gives me, hopefully, an air of confidence when I'm talking to the public or on hustings, that I know what I'm talking about because I've experienced it. And people feed into me over the years and tell me what frustrates them about the decision-making process. And I like to think that as mayor, I can offer that intervention on their part to make the decision-making work in the interests of the people it's meant to, as opposed to work in the interests of the decision makers, which is often the case.
Interesting. I remember when it was first announced, when you got selected as the candidate for the Lib Dems, you gave a statement out to say that you wanted to make sure, because obviously it's a very new role, nobody knows what to expect for West Yorkshire, and you wanted to make sure that the mayoral role doesn't become a costly role with because a lot of people are worried, thinking, if we're going to get a mayor, who's going to pay for him or her, and taxes are going to go up, and what will they deliver, or is it just going to be another position that the public are just going to have to pay for? So you said that you're going to make sure that doesn't happen. How are you going to make sure that doesn't happen is what I want to know.
Well, you've got to make sure that the role makes a difference. The problem is the way that the deal was set up between the Labour council leaders and the Conservative Chancellor and Minister for Local Government is that actually you have very few powers as a mayor, and somebody could be getting paid 100 grand for not doing very much in terms of decision making, because a lot of the decisions on the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, it's basically a little bit of a stitch up between the different leaders of the councils, and they see the money that's coming in and they go, right, well, that's your share, that's my share, all agreed. And what the mayor needs to do is to say, well, just hang on a little bit, let's just make sure that the money is being spent better. And that's how you get value from the West Yorkshire Mayor. They need to intervene, and they need to make sure that they prioritise and that they invest in the creativity of the people of West Yorkshire, not just dividing up extra money which has been delegated to us from Westminster and going, oh, here's your share to the different councils so they can back up their budgets which are under pressure. We need to make sure that it's getting out into the communities and that everyone feels that they're getting a fair share. And that's why I'd like to see the money which is there, around the £38 million per year that the mayor gets. At the moment, the Combined Authority has already spent up that money for this year, and they've even spent it up for next year before the mayor's even elected and had a chance to go, here's what I stand for. And I want to make sure that money gets spent on creativity and making things work and getting people moving. So, for instance, in areas like agriculture, a lot of people go, well, West Yorkshire, it's a very urban place. You need to make sure that your investment is to do with manufacturing and the service industries. Well, actually, West Yorkshire's a really green place as well. It's got some fantastic countryside. And it's one of the things that makes it a really attractive place to live. And all the people that live there really appreciate that. Now, farmers and communities that are more rural are actually under a little bit of pressure post-Brexit. And they could do with a little bit of certainty that they have some investment coming their way and that they play an important part in the future economy. Because when we're looking at the new green jobs, yes, you're going to have to look at things like getting hydrogen into the steel industry so that it's a cleaner manufacturing process. But you also need to think about how you get more renewable energy delivered in the West Yorkshire footprint. And where better to do that than on solar farms, for instance, out in the countryside. And when it comes to making sure that we have food security and we reduce our food miles and we're not shipping it across continent or across the country, let's get some fringe farming working whereby we can grow our own food within West Yorkshire and it's just 1 or 2 miles away. So it's that kind of stimulation that we need to get the economy going so that people with rural businesses have a far more sustainable future. And that's the kind of work which has already taken place somewhat within the manufacturing and the services sector. We need to do more of it still, but that's the kind of difference I'd like to make because I can offer a different perspective.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, you mentioned a lot about, getting the economy going. And obviously we've had, still in a pandemic, which has, stifled the economy and, sort of put a hold on a lot of businesses in terms of trading. So how will you help support bringing extra investment into the area and support existing businesses who have literally, been crippled because of COVID?
Well, first of all, we need to make sure that the existing businesses that are there get the help which is meant to be available from the government, because the combined authority is the institution that distributes the COVID relief money. But we also need to make sure that they're getting as good finance as they can. So I know that there's a big issue with debt at the moment, and I think we need to be putting pressure on government to allow us to facilitate an easier way forward for people to manage that debt. Because if you owe money, you're less likely to invest in the company that you've got. And we want to make sure that people do have the confidence to invest. So it's not something which is necessarily within the power of the mayor, but because the mayor has a platform once they are elected to stand up for the people that they're meant to represent, especially in an economic context, then there's the possibility of exerting some real pressure onto the government to do things differently. And I know that Andy Burnham has done so for Greater Manchester, and I know that Mr. Houchen's done so for Teesport up in the north. Two people from different parties to me, but the point is they're quite loud and they're quite vocal and they say what they want. And in the past, actually, I have to say, the leadership of the different councils within West Yorkshire and within the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, I think sometimes they're a little bit too polite. And they think, well, if we're nice, we'll get more off the government. Well, actually, the results show that often you don't. And I think that's one of the reasons why the mayor needs to be pretty independent of the vested interests that are there so far, and can feel free of having to defend the government on one hand or the local authorities on the other, and can actually challenge both to do more.
Fantastic. Now, obviously, our newspaper's focused on the South Asian community across West Yorkshire, and our readers often get in touch with us, and there's always concerns that they always get left behind, and in particular when it comes to employment opportunities, and also in terms of access to skills and further training. How will you look at making sure that those communities are supported, and obviously those opportunities are fair and equal for everyone?
Well, that's one of the great challenges for adult education, actually, is there are so many demands put on it, and it's pulled in lots of different directions, like, oh, you must deliver huge amounts of apprenticeships and whatever. Well, one of the pressures that's going to be put on it immediately is to get the new skills for the new green economy. So that's going to be a priority for me. But I also want to make sure that when those qualifications are being set up, that we make sure that we're targeting those people that need it most. And that will involve making sure that we're talking to the communities that have a high level of not in employment, education or training at the moment, and facilitating them to get into this training. I want to make sure that it's less dependent upon having a certain skill level already from schooling to enter into this training, because that can sometimes be discrimination in another form, in saying, well, you didn't do well at school, so tough. But the point about adult education is it should be a second opportunity, because too often a school education doesn't really suit the character of some people. It sometimes the schooling doesn't work because they've had a difficult family issue at the time. And sometimes they don't do well in school because their parents before them didn't do well in school. And there's a generational issue that needs to be addressed. And one of the commitments I've made as mayor is to make sure that we're prioritising, for instance, young parents in particular, who might not be in employment because they've got child rearing responsibilities as well. Want to make sure that they get opportunities to get into education again, so that they can get the basic qualifications that mean that they are more confident parents to offer the support that's needed for the kids that they have. Because one of the things that COVID has taught us is homeschooling. The relevance of it was really underestimated until everybody had to do it. And some parents found it much easier to do because they had spare income to get all the gadgets, make sure the kids had laptops, and others did not. And some of them, of course, had a bigger confidence in terms of their own educational performance to feel that they could support their kids. I want to make sure that every parent feels that same level of confidence, so that it's a long-term plan. We want to make sure that not just this generation, but the next generation gets better access to training and employment. And if we can do that, we can enable some of these younger parents, for instance, to go into part-time employment. Not every employment has to be full-time. Part-time work is really valuable, not just in terms of getting a little bit of extra income into a family, but building that confidence and giving people a different perspective outside of the home space as well. And in that new economy which is being developed, I think people are hopefully going to be less focused on their overall, income, and more about the quality of life. And we need to be thinking about that as well as decision makers, making sure that we have those 15-minute neighbourhoods so that people who do want to work flexibly, have caring responsibilities for older relatives or younger children, can still get into the jobs market, that there are jobs available close to where they live. And because too often, all the investment that's happened in the West Yorkshire area has been on getting infrastructure in place to get people in and out of Leeds city centre and Bradford city centre on a daily commute. And actually, we want more jobs generated in the communities where people actually live. And it's going to be hard to turn around that mindset, but that's something that I think we really need to do, because to get the prosperity levels up, actually, we don't need. It's nice to get inward investment, because it brings new jobs, but actually, there's billions of pounds already being spent in our own local economy, and particularly in areas like care and health. Think of how many people need to have personal support as home care or in residential situations. Too often, those services are delivered by really big corporations, which are based in London or even sometimes internationally, and are run by hedge funds. We want to see more companies which are being created in our local economy, which are run by just a single person, or they can be little cooperatives. People can work part-time, they can make it work for themselves, and they'll be able to deliver bespoke care. but they're not currently being supported by local authorities in the way that they could be. And I think the mayor could have a really good role in delivering that care economy that we have locally and reshaping it so that it works better for us. And actually it becomes cheaper for the people who want to get that care, but also the people who are running these smaller companies can reinvest their income back into the economy within which they live. And I think that's really important. We shouldn't just be thinking about always attracting people from the outside. It should be about enabling people that are already there. And we have such potential in West Yorkshire. We have one of the youngest populations as well, especially in areas like Bradford.
Yeah.
There's such potential there, and we need to make sure that we're investing in that rather than thinking that the solution is always in bringing in people from elsewhere.
Very exciting and ambitious, I have to say. So that brings me to talking to you about housing, because obviously that's another area where most of our readers say that they find it really hard to access. I mean, especially in places like inner city Bradford, for them to access good quality housing. And obviously since the pandemic, we've all been locked in our homes, so those inequalities have been more transparent lately. How will you help create better, affordable housing for those communities?
Well, it's a very difficult one, actually. It should be easy, shouldn't it? Because, like you've just said, it's one of the basic things that people expect from decision makers is to deliver, an economy that allows them to buy their own home or rent at a reasonable price. And the problem that we've got at the moment is that there's far too much decision making happening by house builders as opposed to public authorities. And the government at the moment has taken away the spatial planning powers of the mayor for West Yorkshire until they've decided what their new housing promotion regime looks like. And unfortunately for us, past experience tells us that they think that more housing will be built locally by giving more freedoms to housing developers. And actually that's not the case, because a lot of the time they'll get a piece of land, they'll get permission on it, and then they won't build on it because they want to keep the price of houses up. And if you ration the supply of housing, it keeps that price up. And a lot of housing coming onto the market at once will reduce prices. Now, as mayor, I want to make sure that local authorities are delivering what they're meant to do too. So, for instance, Leeds City Council has depended on its housing growth numbers being delivered by a real growth in student housing which is being built. Now, student housing is great to make sure that students get a decent place to live while they're studying, and it might mean that family housing gets released in some of those areas where students have traditionally had their digs in some of the suburbs. But actually, it doesn't produce any new affordable housing because those developments don't have to do it. So those people who are waiting for a decent rented home in some of the suburbs in the city aren't going to get a look in if that's all that councils depend upon. I want to make sure that we have a proper planning system where eco homes are seen as well as the way forward. We need to make sure that all new housing has a really higher standard of insulation and that they need as little heating as possible, because that's also what makes housing unaffordable. The fact that you have to spend a lot of money in keeping it warm and comfortable for your family. So we need to sort out that. Once again, we need to ensure that smaller local development companies get a foot on the ladder and have access to land. And that's one of the challenges I'm going to put to councils, because they own most of the available land that isn't in the hands of developers already. And if we want a brownfield revival in terms of some of those more difficult inner city areas to get built on, we should be giving a leg up to these smaller developers in some way. And that's something that I'm going to be working on. And I've been talking to housing associations as well. They have real ambition to build locally. And I think sometimes it's about having difficult decisions with local authorities, but also for the mayor to identify some money in the mayoral budget to offer stimulus packages for people to build in certain areas. So I'm sorry, it's not an easy solution.
No.
I know that, for instance, with Tracy Graben, one of my competitors, is saying, I'll build 5,000 new homes. I'm thinking, well, actually, more than 5,000 homes get built already in West Yorkshire through the current planning system. So I'm not sure exactly what she's proposing to do, which is different. Is it going to be an extra 5,000? I don't know. And just throwing a figure out there doesn't really help. You need to think about the principles behind what you want to achieve, and then the market hopefully will respond accordingly.
There's a lot of work there to be done then, from what you've listed.
There is, but the point is the mayor can't do it themselves. They've got to, that's what I'm talking about in terms of, they've got to get out there and release other people's creativity. There are so many people out there that really want their small companies to scale up to deliver even more. And that's where the intervention needs to be made. So
now to just conclude, obviously, the interview, what I'd like to ask you is, this is the first time we're going to get a mayor, a West Yorkshire mayor. If you were to give people a vision of what West Yorkshire would look like if you got elected as the mayor, what is that vision? What would it look like?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to say it would be an empowered West Yorkshire. Yeah. So, but one of the things I'm very keen on is the two main parties keep talking about how they want to build a red wall or a blue wall, and it's all about them having a tug of war with voters. What I want to do is I want to enable citizens, not just voters, and I want to make sure that everybody who lives in the community that they're in, that they have some control about how it develops in the future. That's one of the reasons why I'm very keen to develop 15-minute neighbourhoods. Why what I want to do as the person in charge of the transport infrastructure for West Yorkshire is to make sure that every community has their own transport plan, and that any schemes that get produced on a West Yorkshire level refer to them. I want to make sure that everybody has a high street that works for them, and also a cultural hub in that high street, so that as they change, and it's not just about retail, but it's more about people meeting and socializing and being less isolated, and people who are working more at home post-COVID. We've got to learn from the behaviours that we've gone through. They'll be working more at home. They need to have somewhere where they can have a break, and that will stimulate, hopefully, economic activity in those areas. So I want to give the community back to the community, and I want to feel that anybody can approach the mayor and their office and say, I've got something that I want to achieve. I've got something that I want to contribute. Can you please tell me how I can get help to do it? I want West Yorkshire to be empowered and enabled. And it can only do that if it has the leadership that's worth having. And that means one which listens.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Wish you all the best. And hopefully, I'm sure I'll be speaking to you again